So I went to the doctor, and I said to the doctor, "It's really sore when I do this." And the doctor said, "Don't do it then." So I didn't actually go to the doctor and say that. That was Tommy Cooper who did that. But I did have a sore arm. And I had a sore arm for the last couple of days because on Friday I had to go for my COVID vaccine. And so I went along to get the vaccine, and I was told, "You may not feel very good for a couple of days after the vaccine." And I'm thinking, well, this is Friday, and Sunday's just a couple of days later. Maybe I'll be feeling ill on Sunday. And then I thought, well, if I am feeling ill on Sunday, I can just tell everybody I'm feeling ill because I've had my jag and just make it a feature of the service. So I'll mention about the COVID jab. So my arm was a wee bit sore, but it didn't last very long, the soreness, and I'm feeling okay now. And hopefully that's good news for me and for all of us who've had our second COVID jab. Now, I know that we don't know everything about COVID. We really don't. It's a mystery. We're still finding out. And I know that we don't know for sure what's coming next, and we can't really be certain of anything. And in our hurry to find something that's going to help us all, we've quickly got these vaccinations together to do the job. So hopefully they're going to work. So we'll stay in a hopeful, optimistic note, and we can assume that these jabs that we get are literally just what the doctor ordered. They're going to help us. And it's amazing. One quick moment and you have passed from danger to relative safety. This magical moment of vaccination moves you from a place of being vulnerable to being protected, just in a moment. So when you walk into that building, you're still at risk. And when you walk out of the building a few minutes later, the risk has been reduced dramatically. The danger is gone. You can relax. One small moment that changes everything. It's a deal, if you like. It's a transaction. Quick, easy, with long-lasting effects. I saw a video the other day on an Edinburgh church website, and the video was called "The Message of Jesus," and it was like 15 minutes tops. And I thought, that's quite short for the message of Jesus, but that's good. But then I realized it wasn't just called "The Message of Jesus." There was a line beside it that said, "The message of Jesus summed up brilliantly by Dr. Stephen Lawson," who's an American guy. So the message of Jesus summed up brilliantly. Now, Jesus was a preacher. Jesus was a teacher. Jesus was a prophet. Jesus was a sage of great wisdom, the greatest communicator the world has ever seen. So the message of Jesus is a real big deal. So it was quite interesting that when I watched the message of Jesus, it included not anything that Jesus had ever said. Not one single thing that Jesus said was in the message of Jesus. Instead, the message of Jesus described that moment when he was captured, arrested, and crucified, nailed onto that cross, and then God raised him to life 3 days later. And this was the moment when Jesus saved everyone who believes in him. And so it means, thanks to this moment, we go to heaven when we die, providing we make the right response. All you have to do is say a very quick prayer, and just like the COVID jab, you move immediately from being in danger to eternal safety. And in fact, even the wee prayer you have to say was inside the message of Jesus. And the man who was talking about it said, "This is the greatest offer in the world." So don't worry about the life of Jesus or the things he said, his teaching, his instructions, his parables, his sermons, his actions for justice and peace and inclusion and forgiveness and healing, because it turns out that doesn't really matter. The message of Jesus is about what happens when we die. And if you accept this, you can basically forget about Jesus because you've done it. You've done it. You're saved. You see, in this world, people are either in or out, loved or hated. And now, if you've said that prayer, you're going to heaven. One small moment changes everything. A deal, a transaction, quick and easy with long-lasting effects. There's lots of consequences of believing or saying that the message of Jesus is about what happens when we die. One of them, I'll only mention one, is that it means there's not actually anything for us to do. We don't need to do anything. We don't need to respond in any way once we've said that magical prayer. It doesn't actually change us. It doesn't have any real effect on us. It doesn't make us different people. So like getting the COVID jab, we can just forget about everything else now. We can just go home and put our feet up. No responsibilities, no actions, no challenges, no adventures, no movement needed in our part. It asks nothing of us. Just a wee jag, just a wee moment in prayer, just a wee prayer, that's it, you're done. You go to heaven when you die. Last week in our service, Bill Greenock was speaking, and he spoke very movingly and powerfully about his thoughts on life after death. Now, our mortality is not something we usually think about much. It's not uppermost in our minds most of the time. It's tempting to not think about it. But when we get older, perhaps, or if we're facing a big operation, like Bill was recently, then it can sometimes make you start thinking about these thoughts. And Bill reflected that when he started to think about this, that he felt safe. And he thought to himself that even if the worst was to happen, that he just knew he would be okay. Now, when Bill mentions life after death, I agree with him totally. I believe this is a given. When we die, we are received by the giver of life. The one who is the giver of life will receive us. When we die, we will be in God's hands. And as Christians, thanks to what did happen at Easter, we know that God is stronger than death and that God is love. So I believe this. But it is the future. And as long as we are here in this world, our focus has to be on this world too. Christianity is first and foremost about here and now. Christianity isn't about a one-moment transaction. What Jesus does is he calls us into a relationship with God, and something that will involve our whole selves, our whole lives, something that affects us every single day, and something that's good news not just for us, but for other people too. To ignore the teachings of Jesus is to insult him, not honor him. To suggest that the real message of Jesus is something that you say it is, rather than what Jesus himself said, is to insult Jesus. To call Jesus Lord and not pay attention to what he says is to be a liar. As Jesus himself said, "Why do you call me Lord and not do what I say?" The Christian life is not about a ticket. It's about a relationship. It's not about a wee piece of paper or card that we have folded in or safely in our wallet that we just need to produce on demand to show St. Peter at the gates of heaven when we happen to die. It's an ongoing relationship that we have with God through Jesus. And it begins now, not later. And this relationship will develop and it will grow, as all relationships must. In today's reading, Jesus said a pretty strange thing. He often did. He turned to his friends and he said to them, "I am the real vine." And that is a strange thing to say. If I said to you today, I am the true vine, you'd be wondering what I was drinking. In fact, if I said that I'm the false vine, you would wonder that as well, because we don't refer to one another as vines. But in Jesus' world, vines were commonplace. They were everyday plants. And people knew how to carefully tend and look after a vine in order so they could harvest good grapes. It turns out that each vine plant has two different branches. One bears fruit and the other doesn't. Literally doesn't bear any fruit at all. And that branch always has to be removed so that it doesn't take up too much of the plant's strength. There's no point in the plant spending energy in a branch that's never going to yield anything. And also it turns out that this empty branch, this plain branch, can't really be used for anything else. Although it is wood, it's a very soft kind of wood. It's brittle, and nothing can be made out of it. So the only thing people did with these kind of branches was just to gather them up and then just burn them. In the Old Testament, the image of the vine was often used of the relationship between God and God's people. Jesus is saying, He is the vine, we are the branches. If we're to be as productive and as fruitful as we can be, we need to be sticking together in relationship. Our relationship with God through Jesus is given to help us make the most of our lives and be a blessing to others. It's not just for us, selfishly, about us and our future, but in order that the whole world can benefit and we start to see more fairness and love and caring. So I guess what I'm saying today is that we need to know that God loves us and that God loves others too. We need to show love and acceptance to other people just as God has shown love and acceptance to us. And that means we need to care about the world and those who live in it. And it means doing what we can to make it fairer and better. And that can involve us being part of important moments. And if important moments are not part of our faith, then that means we're indifferent rather than caring. So, for example, this year we've got COP26 on our very doorstep. In all the places in the world, they're coming to Glasgow. We need positive change for our world. We need to address the issues facing our world. That is so important. And our building here, right here in Langside, may be one of the ones that will be used for hosting the conference. Meetings and events might be taking place here later on in the year. It's a really important time, and we should be part of it. But much sooner than that, just a couple of days away, there's going to be an election in our country and a chance for us to be involved. What has that got to do with our faith? Everything. Because the choices that we make can mean life and death for people. We certainly need some kind of change if we want to create a fairer world. Here's just one example, and we're talking about life and death. The UK government has just slashed its overseas aid budget by 85% this year. And that includes, among many other things, it includes programs set up in the poorest countries of the world to help with clean water and sanitation. And these particular programs are going to be cut by 85%. Innocent people will die because of that situation. Families will die because of this decision. We're not hearing too much about it in the news, but this is true. We are one of the richest countries on earth, and we need to do better. There's a church in New York called Riverside Church, and there's been many fine pastors over the years in that church. The latest pastor they had, because they're actually vacant at the moment, was a woman called Amy Butler. And a couple of years ago, the Bible readings that were coming up were going to be focusing on the Sermon on the Mount. And because we're going to be looking at the Sermon on the Mount over a number of weeks, Amy decided to do something different on the very first Sunday. So instead of her usual sermon, what she did was she just preached the Sermon on the Mount, and she just read out the words of Jesus in contemporary language. And she didn't say she was going to do that, she just did it. And that was the sermon. So she preached the Sermon on the Mount, and she said a funny thing happened afterwards. It was at coffee hour after the service, and several people came up to her to tell her they really didn't agree with some of the parts of her sermon. And of course, what was funny about that was it wasn't her sermon, it was Jesus' sermon, and it was Jesus' words. This was the message of Jesus. And she got to thinking about the fact that while there are great bits in the Sermon on the Mount, there are bits that we don't like because they seem too extreme or challenging or different from what we're used to. This sermon really packs a challenging punch. And she concluded that in her country, in America today, people don't want anything that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. And that includes the church. Many people in church want a faith that makes little or no demands on them. Something that fits in comfortably with their already comfortable lifestyle. And in her view, in many places, the gospel is boiled down to trying to be nice, or it's a foolproof recipe for wealth and success, or an excuse to exclude or even hate people who are different in some ways. If we are serious about Jesus, we need to recover the counter-cultural message he lived and proclaimed. So having had this flack from people in her congregation over the preaching of Jesus' words at coffee hour, Amy finished her great article by saying this. She imagined it was Jesus who'd finished his sermon and he had gone down to his coffee hour. And so she wrote this. My guess is that Jesus came down from the Mount to his coffee hour, and several people went up to him and told him they did not like or agree with some of the parts of his sermon that day. It just seemed too alternative and flew in the face of the Middle Eastern culture they were used to. I can only surmise that Jesus looked them straight in the eye, as he certainly would us, and said, yes, that's the point. Yes, that's the point. I am doing and living and saying something different. It's challenging, but it's better. And I'm calling you to be part of this too. The message of Jesus is not what we say about Jesus, but what Jesus himself said and says to us. Jesus calls us into a partnership, to be joined together with him in a life-changing relationship like a branch to a vine. And if we stick close to him, we'll discover that even our lives can bear fruit and bring hope to a hurting world. Thanks be to God.